Hello friends, I'm David Vos. Today is November 13th, 2016. It's good to see everybody today. Well, election's over and I want to get back into doing some videos and talking about some very important spiritual matters that, we left kind of hanging. There's all kinds of things that I just haven't even been able to get to. Because, number one, I'm moving to Texas and I've been doing a lot of moving and I've got so much to do. Been working on my truck. Working on this old house, and I still haven't finished putting that book up. I only got like 4 of the videos of that book, and there should be about 10 of those. So I'm sorry that I didn't get that up, but that takes a lot of time to do, and I haven't been able to do that. But today, I want to get back into just studying esoteric wisdom and biblical symbolism and truth. Because it's so important that we figure out what's going on. And, we're all trying to figure out how to be happy, how to be fulfilled. We want to all find our Father in heaven. And we all want to feel that we're at peace with our Maker. We want to understand what's required of us. How can we contact our Father in heaven? I know that's a word that Christians don't use a lot. We need to understand that we have to grow up and be mature Christians. As children, sometimes you tell your children little bedtime stories, just little fairy tales. So the Bible is written in parables. Now we've covered this very, very well. Jesus said he wouldn't even talk to anyone or teach without parables. And the Bible's all parabolic because we, as human beings, cannot grasp the unfathomable riches of the amazing truths that we need to know one day when we grow up. One of the things that Jesus said when he returned back in that resurrection, he met them and they finally recognized him. They began to understand who he was. Even after the disciples recognized the Christ, the resurrected, powerful Son of God, the living and true God. And they understand, and their eyes were open, and they understand Christ and all the scriptures. And it says that their heart burned within them while they were on the road, and they were eating the bread, and they ate the fishes and the honey, that enlightenment. He fed them this spiritual diet, and their eyes became open, and they understood. And then that's when he told them, he says, I have a lot more stuff I want to tell you, but you're not ready for it yet. So even some of us Christians that are more mature, we have to understand that the Bible is very symbolic, and there's a lot that even many of us have still been kind of hanging on like a little pacifier. See, we still want to think of our Father in heaven like this big bearded man, right? He's up there and he's smoking a pipe or something, right? He's this old man. Got thunderbolts and lightning bolts and everything, and that's not our Father in heaven. The Bible says our Father is Spirit. That El Elyon, that the Bible in English we translate God, or the Most High. The Most High is light. Now, there again, it's like, oh, well, he revealed it now. We found out that the Most High is light. Well, that's literal. In a sense, energy. But it's also still symbolic. Because in those days, they didn't know what light was other than it enlightened the mind. You turn the light on, you can see what's going on. So it meant illumination, enlightenment, consciousness, higher consciousness. And really what it's saying is our Father is mind, intelligence, supreme, immense, immeasurable intelligence. Because you see, it says, he dwells in unapproachable light. What that means is that you and I can learn, and we can learn, and we can learn, but we're never going to approach the intelligence level and the conscious awareness that our Father in heaven has. And our Father in heaven dwells in all, through all, and above all, and we're all part of his body. So we're all one Jesus said, I and the Father are one, and ye are one with us, as I am one with the Father. We're all one. And this is what the New Testament is trying to teach us. But it takes a lot to wake up and to realize that our Father in heaven is not a bearded man in the sky. Okay, now I just said that as an example because what I really want to get into in this video is thorns and thistles. This is going to be a very interesting study because what we want to do is understand how we're supposed to live and be healthy. Because this is, we can't know everything. And there's lots of stuff we can study and learn. But in this video, I want to get down into what we're supposed to do as human beings right now to be as healthy as we can and to really be full of the life that our Father in heaven is offering us. Because this means everlasting life, taking in knowledge of you, the only true and living divine being. So we need to understand him. We need to know him. And we need to understand our relationship to him and what he wants, because he created us and he knows what we need. Now see, people die, people suffer needlessly, and we don't want that. So we're trying to figure out how we can live in harmony and have that peace. Jesus came to do away with the works of darkness, ignorance, and he brought the light. So we want to enter into that light, be aware of the truth, and grow up in maturity in Christ. So here is where I want to start today. In Genesis chapter 1, the whole chapter is how Elohim creates the heavens and the earth. And there are 6 days of creation. And in that, there is no mention of Jehovah or Yahweh. Because that is the original and the only creation story in the Bible. Now, I've said many times that the second chapter is the second creation story. And for practical purposes, that's true, except that Jehovah cannot create anything. And in fact, the word create is not in there. In the second chapter, it uses a different word. The first chapter is bara, and the second chapter is yasar, which means to form. And it's talking about bringing things into its base physical form. So our Father in heaven created all that is spiritual and good. And it is this terrible, egotistical God of wrath that brings man into the form and then lays upon him commandments and is wrathful and then curses them and throws them out of the garden. Now, for a lot of you, that's going to be shocking. If you haven't seen any of the other videos that I've done, go back and watch some of the other videos to establish who the true and living divine being is. But I got to start right there because in this video, we can't rehash all that we've talked about. So, for those of you who already understand who this Jehovah is and all of these carnal laws, and you know that it was Jehovah that created this garden and brought everything into form, we have to ask ourselves, if Jehovah created the garden, perhaps gardens are bad. Should we just live off the land like a wild, should we just live in a wild situation? No. Because you see, this Jehovah, he wanted enlightenment. He had some of this enlightenment. He was one of the gods. And so the Sumerian tablets explains this a little bit better. When they came to this planet, they began to use humans like slaves. And at first, they let Adam into the garden. But in that garden, they had technology and learning and wisdom. And they said to Adam, we don't want you messing with any of that because we want you to be our slave. You're not worthy of this knowledge, this enlightenment. So, the story in the Sumerian tablets is that they got a hold of some of this knowledge, and it really pissed off Jehovah. And so Jehovah had to cast them out so they didn't get more of this enlightenment and become like God and live forever, because they needed them to be their slaves. This is what Jehovah created this garden for. So this is So see, Jehovah didn't necessarily create the garden for Adam and Eve. He created the garden for himself. And he made Adam his slave to till the garden and to cultivate it and to prune the trees. You see, Adam wasn't there because, oh, Jehovah was so loving and wonderful and he made this garden and says, come on in, eat all the trees and enjoy it. No, he says, come on in, but don't eat none of the trees of knowledge. See, don't be partaking of enlightenment here. Just you can come on in and cultivate the ground. But you see, Jehovah did not say, I want you to have dominion over this garden. That was our Father in heaven in the first chapter, when he created the whole world. And he created all the animals and everything, and he told Adam, I want you to have dominion. But in the second chapter, there's no mention of that. All we have in that chapter is Jehovah getting angry because he got knowledge and he kicks him out. Now, when he kicked him out, I want to pay special attention to where this Jehovah curses Adam. The first thing he said was, cursed be the ground on your account. Now see, our Father in heaven doesn't curse us. He doesn't curse the earth or the ground. He's light and there's no darkness in him. And he's love. He is perfect love. And so he doesn't have wrath. He doesn't curse people. Jesus said, I came to give you life and that more abundantly. Jesus said there's one who condemns you and who has judgment for you. And that's Moses. But he says, I don't condemn you. And my Father, see, I only do what my Father says. And what my Father does, I do also. So when Jesus came to love us, see, that's what our Father does also. So Jesus taught us to love like his Father. And he told the Jews, your father is the devil. And he's been a liar from the very beginning. From the very minute he walked in there and Adam and Eve were in the garden, he lied to them. Because he said, you shouldn't eat the knowledge because you'll die. Well, it turns out that Adam and Eve, when they ate from the tree of knowledge, their eyes became opened and they were like God, knowing good and evil. They could do just what Jehovah did. They had the same ability that Jehovah had to learn and become enlightened because they were children of Elohim. They were gods. But Jehovah wanted to keep them in bondage. So he cursed them and he laid commandments upon them. Then he got very angry when he broke those commandments. And unlike a father would treat their children, this was a hired hand. This was not the father. This was not the husbandman. This was a hired hand. And Jesus said, anybody who comes who's a hired hand, he doesn't love the sheep, and the sheep are scattered. So that's what happened. Human beings were thrown out. And this is what happened to Israel. This God, Jehovah, cast them out. And they became lost. And now the tribes of Israel are lost throughout the world. See, our Father does not do that. But he wants to. Jesus said, how I've wanted to gather you like a hen does her chickens. That's not what Jehovah wanted. Jehovah wanted to scatter them and to punish them and to be angry. Jehovah wanted to wipe out the nations. He wanted to curse Israel. And he took pleasure in crushing them, as it says in Isaiah 53. So, what does he mean then, the ground shall be cursed? Well, if you go out into nature, you're not going to get a garden. You're going to find that the earth has gone back to its wild nature. So if you go out and you try to eat fruit that grows in the wild, it's not going to produce for you. See, that's why it says, by the sweat of your face you will eat bread until you die. That word in Hebrew is lacham. Lacham, that's the same word for one of the children of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The word Ham in the Hebrew is cham, and he means burned one. So lacham means that which is burned or processed food. Now in the Hebrew it came to mean bread, but in the Arabian tongue it means meat. So the word doesn't necessarily just mean bread or meat. It just came to mean that because the Hebrews ate a lot of bread and they began to call their bread lacham. The Arabs ate a lot of meat, so they began to call their meat lacham, because in their tongue, in both of their tongues, it means that which is cooked. So, is that saying then that if we eat cooked food, we're going to die? Not necessarily. There have been those who have said that we have to eat all food that is natural and raw. Well, we do need to eat whole food. Only whole food can be eaten. But must we eat only raw? Is this what it's saying? Because Jehovah cast us out of the garden and he cursed the earth, and then he said, now you're going to eat cooked food until you die? Well, he said that, but he didn't say that because you eat cooked food, you're going to die. What he said is because I've cursed the ground, it won't produce for you except thorns and thistles. And it's going to be really hard to get that fruit, because you're not going to be living in this orchard. Now, the orchard, see, the word garden in Hebrew there means an orchard. So they were living in a garden or an orchard, and there were trees of life. And they ate the fruit, and they could live forever. Now, that's both spiritual and literal. If we eat fruit like we're supposed to, that's how our Father in heaven made food for us. The trees produce these things called fruit, and we eat that. With photosynthesis, the little leaves flashing, up there, and bringing the sunshine in, and the roots pulling up all the minerals and nutrients. And together with photosynthesis, a tree will produce food. Well, all vegetation produces some kind of food. But in a garden, you cultivate it and you make trees that produce good fruit that you can get to and harvest, so that you always have food in an abundance. Good, sweet, tasting, wonderful fruit. But when you go out into the wild, it's very hard to cultivate and to harvest, and it's by the sweat of our face that we end up getting this fruit. And we can't sometimes even get enough of it. So a lot of times, throughout the ages, people couldn't get enough of it. So they ended up eating meat or other things. Sometimes they only had acorns to eat. That was it. And the Indians would boil it and smash it and make a mesh out of it, like a mush, like a porridge. Sometimes they would dry it out and eat little acorn cakes. But sometimes they went through starvation because they couldn't get enough food. And then sometimes during periods of starvation, they had to eat animals and so forth. And animal is not good for you, animal flesh. So they didn't live forever. And here's another thing. It's because life got so hard, people suffered. And they found that there were certain drugs in nature that you could take that would make you feel better. But those drugs became addictive and they killed you. Such as alcohol. You could take grape juice, which is wonderful. It's a blessing. But if you take grape juice and you make it ferment, it turns into wine. Makes you feel better for a while, but it also makes you sick. And it'll age you and make you die. You say, well, I don't drink wine, Dave. Well, people did heroin. Yeah, clear back in the days of Egypt and Babylon, people were sitting on the street doing heroin until they died. They only lived to be 20 years old because they did so much heroin. So there wasn't any commercials going around in public, sentiment telling everybody, don't do it, it's bad for you. Back in those days, everybody did it. They didn't really know why they died. Everybody only lived to be 30, 40, 50 years old. They thought that was natural. They didn't even realize that these drugs were killing them. And if they didn't do any drugs at all, which almost everybody did, some sort of tobacco or drug or something, if they didn't do any of that, they learned to take and eat foods that weren't good for you. Flour, white flour. Mankind has lived off this white flour and made this sort of bread off of it for centuries. And this white flour and this kind of bread will actually kill you. Now that's not what it's talking about there in Genesis, where it says you'll eat lachem until you die. Because not all bread is bad for you. But white bread, processed white bread with chemicals in it that they've been feeding people for thousands of years, that's not good for you. But many people in the days of Jesus ate good bread. But that bread, if you read in the Bible, in the book of Ezekiel and other places, and you look back into classical writings, you'll find that they didn't make that bread out of wheat. They made that bread out of beans and lentils and barley, spelt, and nuts, and all kinds of things. It was never just made out of wheat. And they didn't make it out of white flour that was bleached. And they didn't put all of this nasty, sodium chloride and all the stuff that we've got today. That stuff is poison. And that's what's making people sick. So then after Jehovah tells them, you're going to die because you have to process your food, because you're not going to be able to get to this fruit. There's going to be very little fruit, so you're going to have to live by the sweat of your brow and then die young, eating this food that you have to process. But then he says, and the ground will not produce for you but thorns and thistles. Do you know that almost all of the fruit that you get that's at the market, almost all of it, apples, peaches, cherries, almonds, pears, raspberries, strawberries, almost all the stuff you get in the store, just about everything, avocados, all of those things. Do you know that they all are related to the rose? And they're called, in scientific language, it's called the rosacea species. And all of those came from the rose. And from the rose, one line from the rose became a raspberry, and a strawberry even. And another line grew into an apple tree. See, the rose became the little blossom, and the little rose hip became the apple. But everything that we have today has been cultivated from the lowly rose. So what I'm trying to tell you is that everything we have, that we eat, that we love, and that gives us energy and vitality, and that we live on, all came from agriculture and from cultivation. You see, because if you live out there in the wild, it's just too hard. You go and you work and you work and you sweat and and you plow the field, and it doesn't produce much. All it produces is a little berry. It's maybe a little bitter berry, and you can't eat that, and you can't get enough nutrition. You can't get enough of it. So you end up having to process this food, and just by the sweat of your face, you die. What we're trying to do is find out how we can live much longer and much healthier lives. Well, we've got to eat the fruit. But we've got to get the fruit in abundance, and we've got to get good fruit. Because Jesus said, you don't pick grapes from thorns, and you don't get figs from thistles. You see, thistles and thorns, it doesn't produce much of a fruit. You can get, like out here in Texas, it seems like all of Texas is this mesquite. These big old thorns about that long. And they have beans on them, but it's hard to get to the beans because of all of these thorns. Same thing with all the cactus. They got thorns like that, and you can't get to these beautiful fruits. They're delicious, but you can't hardly pick them. And then the agarite berries, they got little thorns on them berries, or on the bush. So again, it's very difficult to cultivate all of this beautiful food that's growing in Texas. So human beings then took these original, like a rose has thorns. So you took this original thorny bush, and they cultivated it and brought it down to us today as an apple, a pear, a peach, an almond. And these are the things that we can eat. Now, the Bible tells you what you can eat and be healthy. Remember, they were going to the land of milk and honey, a promised land, right, where they could live long and see the generations of the third and fourth generation. And what did they promise them? A land of milk and honey. See, you vegans, you've got to have milk and eggs. Jesus said eggs are a perfect gift from our Father because we need that cholesterol. You can't get the right kind of omega-3 fatty acids from just fruit. So we need milk, which you can make cheese and cream, sour cream, all kinds of stuff you can make with milk and cream. Butter. And it's very vital to our health. Not only that, we need eggs, as Jesus said, and we need honey. See, all three of those things are the fruit, but they're the fruit of an animal. The honey is the fruit of a bee. The egg is the fruit of a chicken. And it's not a chicken, by the way. It's the food that a little baby chicken eats if it's fertilized. But eggs themselves are just food. Eggs is food. Honey is the fruit of a bee. And milk is the fruit of a cow. See, cows can produce more milk than what they need. And we can go and milk those cows. This is why it's much more cost effective to take a cow, and you can use the cow, the bull, for plowing your fields to make agriculture. And you can use the mother cow, the female, to get milk and cream and butter. And you can use the chickens, not to eat the chickens, but you can get more food out of those chickens by eating the eggs, and they're much better for you. So, our Father in heaven says, let's go to the land of milk and honey, and pomegranates, and grapes, and dates, and figs. Those are the things that we should be eating. And you notice that figs, and dates, and pomegranates, and those things, they don't have thorns and thistles. Jesus said, you don't get grapes and figs from thorns and thistles. So what we've got to do then, to live the good life, to be healthy, is to eat whole foods that come from the orchard, from an agricultural place. This is what the Bible teaches. We need to be agricultural. We don't need to be hunters. We get the best food by taking and planting the orchards and then producing that food that comes from the orchard and eating that. So, let's go back again to the first chapter of Genesis. Our Father in heaven created Adam and Eve, and he never said, you're going to die. We could have lived forever. We're his children. And he gave us all the fruit to live. He never said, and you can eat meat. We don't know when they really began to hunt and eat meat. There's a good indication that they began to do it right away. Perhaps even Abel hunted or ate meat, because it appears that they made a sacrifice right there, right out of the, as Jehovah threw them out of the garden, he demanded them, that they should make a sacrifice. And so then this curse that was upon the earth, where it was difficult to get the fruit, and it only produced thorns and thistles, got worse. Now there was winter, and for 6 months out of the year, in many places, you couldn't even grow anything. So you had to take and store your food. And a lot of times you could store nuts, or you could dry your food or make bread. And a lot of times people would get very depressed in the winter times. The sun wouldn't come out because it's winter, and people got depressed, so they began to do tobacco, and drugs, and people started getting very sick. And if you notice that in the Bible, the lifespan of human beings began to drop off quite dramatically. So as people began to eat more meat, and as people began to do more drugs and get depressed, and winter and the curse set in, and they didn't have access to that fruit, they started to die. Now I know a lot of you think, well, that's not true, Dave. I mean, if you're trying to tell us that if you ate fruit you would never die. Well, friends, there's a lot of things that can kill you in this world, and fruit and eating in your diet's only one of them. So I can't tell you that you could never die. But I can tell you that if you really have a communication and a oneness with our Father in heaven, and you become born again, truly born again, it says that the angels will not even allow your foot to stumble against a stone. So nobody knows, because no one up to this day has ever tried eating the right diet. Nobody's ever even understood this until modern times. And yes, there have been vegetarians that have never eaten meat in their entire lives. Many of the apostles were they didn't eat meat, but many of them were martyred. All of them were martyred and murdered. Throughout the Dark Ages, they murdered all of the Christians and vegetarians. So in the last generation, we've had vegetarians. How come they don't live forever? Well, some people who are vegetarians, it is proven that they live a little longer, maybe 10 years longer. Well, that's not much. Well, the reason that they don't live longer than that is because they're not eating the proper diet. Some of them are vegan. They don't eat eggs and milk. You have to have that in your diet. And, many vegetarians eat white bread, sugar. This is even more harmful to your body than meat. So it's not just that you're a vegetarian. You've got to also eat right. You cannot eat this white flour, which is, human beings didn't even know how bad white flour was until recently. White flour is a poison, just like heroin. If you were doing heroin, you're going to die. You're going to age real fast. If you're doing cocaine, you're going to die. You're going to age real fast. What you don't realize is that just like heroin is sugar and white flour and all these chemicals that are in our food. People ate canned food for years. And they put all these preservatives in them, right? Well, we've got to preserve it, right? Salt. Sodium chloride. That's not even salt. That's sodium chloride. People putting it all over their food, and it's a poison. Sugar, sodium chloride, all these things that people put in their food for years. Bleaching the flour, making it white, because remember, they did this way back, time immemorable, because if you use whole grain, it makes a very heavy, hard loaf, and people don't like that. They like that white bread, see? So for centuries, they ate it. They didn't know it was poison. So you see, nowadays, people are becoming aware that you need to eat whole grains and whole foods. The problem is that almost nobody's doing it. It's becoming more and more prevalent. But nobody in all of history has never said, you know something? I'm going to stop eating all white flour, all sugar, all poisons, all candies, all cakes, all donuts. Not eating eggs that, made on some farm where they're pumping antibiotics into the chicken and hormones, but real chickens that grow out there. Most people don't live in the wild anymore, in nature, and have real chickens and make a real orchard and live off of a natural organic orchard. So you'd have to live, if you want to live long and healthy and not get cancer and never get diabetes, you've got to eat organic, whole foods. This is what is going to make you healthy and strong. And how long would you live if you only ate that? No one's ever tried this, so we don't know. But we know that human beings can live for hundreds of years. We know this. And it's not just, you got to eat the right food. It's not only that, but you have to realize that it's very difficult to quit eating all of these foods. I mean, just look at how hard it is for somebody to stop smoking. Or, don't drink coffee anymore, or alcohol. It's very difficult. Alcoholics find it very difficult to stop drinking alcohol, even though it's going to kill them. That they find it very hard to stop smoking or whatever. Heroin addicts, it's killing them. But it's very difficult to get off the heroin. Well, if it's that difficult to get off something that everybody recognizes is a poison, how hard do you think it's going to be to get off sugar completely and white flour and eat only organic food? See, almost no one until modern times has ever even had the opportunity to do this. Because people have lived out in the middle of nowhere, lived in the woods where they couldn't get an orchard. They couldn't produce the fruit. Nowadays, we can go to the grocery market and buy fruit, but then for a long time, it was all genetically modified. Now, guess what? Walmart's giving us some organic fruits, and you can go and buy organic bread, and you can buy organic bananas and apples and peaches and grapes at Walmart now. Organic peanut butter, organic jam. You can get all kinds of things that are organic nowadays. So it's only becoming possible to eat correctly in our modern age. You say, well, that's not all that important, Dave, as long as you eat fruit, right? Friends, you got to understand, a modern pear doesn't even have a core, let alone seeds. It's like, this thing is so modified, it's not even the original pear. Now, it's okay to cultivate. Agriculture is good, to plant and to cultivate. But, you see, it's very important that we don't genetically modify this stuff just for the profit of it, not for your health. As long as food is grown naturally, it's healthy. But a lot of this stuff, they spray chemicals on it and they modify it, genetically modify it. And this is where becomes harmful. Plus, you have to stop burning your food. You can't fry food and expect that it's going to still be good. You put it in oil and fry it, and you've ruined your food, and it's very carcinogenic, and it causes a lot of cancers and diseases. So it's okay to bake your food. It's okay to dehydrate it. You put it in the oven, and basically you take grains, whole grains, and natural ingredients, soak them in some water and knead it and make dough, and then put it in an oven and sort of dehydrate it. You're not burning it and frying it on over fire, right? It's all right to roast something a little bit, just kind of roast the outside of it, but that's different than putting it in hot boiling grease and frying it in grease. You've destroyed it, because when grease is brought to a high temperature, it changes the molecular structure of the grease, and it makes it very, very harmful, and it causes plaque, and that causes disease. So, friends, yes, probably if we lived a perfect life and we had an orchard all of our own, and we could grow all of the fruits that we needed, the pomegranates and the figs and the dates and the peaches and all these things that we needed, and we ate that and only that every day, and honey, and real good honey from bees that we have in our own yard, chickens that we have in our own yard. If we did that, we could probably live hundreds of years. But to the extent that you start bringing in this other food, you're going to narrow your lifespan down. So it's very important that you understand that to live and to be in harmony with our Maker, we need to eat the trees of life. And you don't gather and sweating and working and overexerting ourselves and all the stress and the worry. That's also harmful to us. See, just all the work it takes to get this food. So a lot of us might be eating good, and we're going to the market and Walmart and getting organic food, but our jobs are so stressful, that's killing us. So there's lots of things that we have to do in order to find this harmony that we're talking about. We need to find peace in our lives. We need to have wisdom and raise our children right. When they grow up, they're going to give us a heart attack. Our children grow up and they become disrespectful, and this can kill us just emotionally. So there's lots of stuff that we've got to take control of to be in harmony with our Father in heaven. This is how we're going to bring the kingdom of our Father to the earth. We're the light of the world. We're the salt. And if the salt loses its savor, it's worth nothing but to be trampled underfoot by men. So you're the light of the world. You've got to be a light. You've got to show the world what we're supposed to do. Not only in eating right, but in living right. And so you have to understand that some of this isn't even just diet. Some of this is more than that. If you go and you murder an animal, not only does it affect your conscience, but you're consuming that animal. That moment that you murder the animal, he's in total fear. And you're taking in this violence. You're perpetuating violence in your cells, and you're receiving all of the animalistic nature right into your body by eating the animal. And they say that people who are vegetarians actually become more spiritual, literally, are able to communicate with spirit much better. See, it's very difficult to communicate with the subconscious mind because you have to be aware, spiritually aware. And so a person needs peace, love, integrity. All of these things are important, just as our diet is important, because now we're getting into spiritual diet. Not only must you eat the fruit. So this is one of the reasons why even if somebody were to eat just fruit, they might live to be 150 years old and still die. Why? Because what's more important than what goes into your mouth and goes out into the sewer is what comes out of your heart. Jesus said it's more important what comes out of your heart. You've got to keep your eyes simple, focused. You've got to bring every thought into subjection to Christ. Jesus said you can't change one hair of your head by thinking. Worry doesn't help you. See, the nations, they're out there trying to get, material things. Jesus said if we were just to pursue righteousness, his righteousness, which is love, he told us what he wanted us to do, to live in harmony with all of his world. If we were to do that and live in harmony and pursue his righteousness, he will provide all of these other things. So we don't need to worry, and we don't need to be stressed out, and all of these things that we've done in our lives that has caused all this havoc is killing us. So we've got to eat right, and we've got to be spiritual. And this is how we're going to bring the kingdom of our Father into this world. By eating right, understanding what we are and who we are, and bringing every thought into subjection to Christ. Because, you see, it's not just the physical food, but it's the spiritual food. This is why Jesus said, you will know them by their fruits. You don't get grapes from thorns, and you don't get figs from thistles. So what he's saying is that these people that are teaching you, these Jews, they're teaching you this carnal knowledge. And it was these carnal laws that keeps us in bondage. Not only physically, but spiritually. It makes us physical slaves and spiritual slaves. So, Jesus said, you're looking for the truth. Well, if you're looking for the truth, if you're looking for a blessing, for the understanding and spiritual food, because Jesus fed them, right? He fed them fish, not just the 5 loaves from the law, the Torah. But he broke the Torah and he added 2 fish. He gave them spiritual food, and then he gave them honey. After the resurrection, he brought fish and honey, which is the enlightenment. And you see, if we get this spiritual enlightenment, then their eyes became opened and they recognized him. Then we're in union with Christ and we can live forever. So the first thing we need to do is come into harmony with the physical realm. The second thing, which is far more important, is to come into harmony with the spiritual part. So being a vegetarian isn't just a physical thing. It's also a spiritual thing. When we have love for creation and we don't kill, that love literally energizes our bodies. And we can literally live longer because we're loving. When we love our neighbor, we live longer. And so, the way to live forever, friends, is to start with the physical, and then remember what's very important is the spiritual, and that's the most important thing. Being a vegetarian is very important. You can't do one without the other, because if you're spiritual, you're not going to murder animals. You're not going to get angry and violent and beat your wife and kill animals and run them down, and you're going to be a farmer, and you're going to be a gardener. And you're going to make an orchard, and you're going to eat the fruit, and that aroma of the fruit's going to come in, and you'll lay that on the table, and you'll eat this pure, precious fruit from the promised land, and the milk and the honey. But not only that, you're going to have a family that is in harmony with the Lord, and you're going to teach your children to love one another, and you're going to bring your family into subjection to the love of Christ. And you're going to bring every thought into subjection to Christ. And you're going to live literally forever. This is how we're going to bring in the kingdom of heaven. This is how we're going to bring in our Father in heaven's kingdom upon earth. We are the light of the world. We have to understand these truths and then shine. We've got to make our light shine and teach everyone around us so that we can all live in harmony. Because remember, the early disciples, they lived in harmony and had all things common, and they loved one another. And none of them had too little, and none of them had too much. And so as Christians, this is how we need to live. If we have too much, we need to give some of it to someone that has too little. And we need to trust in our Father in heaven and start giving. Because Jesus said, I have given you freely, I want you to give freely. This is very important. So it's not just what we eat, but it's what we do, friends. So basically, I'm going to go ahead and close there. I'm going to probably talk more about this in the upcoming videos. So you guys, I hope you have a great day. I'm going to go ahead and close. You guys, we'll see you tomorrow.